All right, got a great show for you today. Matt Brooks from Nets Daily and Basketball News is jumping on the podcast to talk everything that's going on with the Brooklyn Nets right now. Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, Sean Marks, Steve Nash. We're going to cover everything that's going on this offseason, how we got here, where it could be going. Matt, one of the best voices talking and thinking and writing about the Nets right now. Really excited for this one. We're going to get into it all. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, those Brooklyn Nets every single day. I'm Doug Norrie. You don't need the introduction to hear that every single day over here. No Adam Armbrecht on the show. He's maintaining a vacation life balance this week, which is good for him, but that's okay. We're filling in today. One of the all-time great fill-ins, Matt Brooks from Nets Daily, Matt Brooks from Basketball News, Matt Brooks, who's been holding down the Nets storylines here for a couple years. Matt, how's it going? Ready to talk all this stuff that we've been talking about here for what feels like forever, but it's really only been a couple weeks.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. It's been kind of a repetitive summer, but like also it's cool that like we're talking about anything during the summer. So it's been odd. It's been a really odd off season, honestly.
Yeah, Matt's been making the podcast rounds for good reason here. Some of the best work in the industry. If you're not following Matt on Twitter or just the work that he does on Basketball News or Nets Daily, you're missing out. I suspect that if you're listening to this, you already do. And that's why we want to have him on the podcast for some expert level opinions. Obviously, Matt's forte is also just the X's and O's stuff. So if you haven't caught up with that piece of just sort of learning about basketball, I suggest going and deep diving into some of his YouTube videos also, because it will just make you smarter. Adam and I were talking about the other day how there's too many folks out there in the greater NBA landscape that are not interested in actually teaching you about basketball. They'd rather tell you just about whatever the stories are. Matt is not one of those guys, so make sure you're following him over there. Matt, let's talk. Hey, there's this guy named Kevin Durant. It feels like there's something he wants. It's unclear. We'll get to the bottom of it at some point. But with the Durant thing, rather than talk about like just the mechanics around a trade, where do you think, if you had to pinpoint it, where do you think things went wrong? Because if you asked anyone this question near the end of the season, exit interviews, like, getting swept by Boston, I don't think anyone would have predicted at that point with any real certainty that Kevin Durant was going to just kind of want out of this team effectively, a month and a half, 2 months later. What do you think went wrong here? Or is like a single thing? Can you point to something? Like, because I think that's sometimes not actually talked about as much as just, it's more about him wanting to trade. It's less about like, can we pinpoint what exactly went wrong here? Like, right. Is there a single thing, or is it just kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts?
Yeah, I think it's probably that. Wanting to have Nash fired, I buy that. Kind of heard similar things around game 2-ish, even as that early of the Boston series. I think in terms of the Kyrie situation and how his contract situation was handled, I don't think that helped anything. Probably point to the Harrington firing, Adam Harrington, who was assistant coach that KD's known since OKC. Steph winning, I think, probably didn't help anything. And Durant is somebody that internalizes things, and that's just kind of something that I think is typical of Durant, is that he internalizes things and he'll go about handling those things in different ways than maybe the average person would. So I think it's probably a combination of those things. What really started it, it's so hard to tell. I mean, honestly, like, it really is hard to tell. And like, if I'm looking at all this in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if all of that is worthy of like where we are right now, where the Nets do have a really good roster. And they, by all signs, point to them wanting to put a winning team together. And a team that really stacks up well against the rest of the East. Like, if that's your reasons for wanting out, I'm just sort of like, all right, well, I get it. Like it's annoying that if they didn't give your close friend a contract, but ultimately, like, dude, the guy barely played. And it's like, I just don't know if it's enough, especially being on like a 4-year deal, which, I mean, at this point, those contracts and extensions don't really matter at this point, but he's still there for 4 years. So yeah, I think it's probably a combination of stuff.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Nash piece in a second here, because I think you said something that I have a few more questions about. But going to the Kyrie piece, I'm with you where it's like, okay, well, you didn't give Kyrie the long-term extension. So do you mean with that one, if you were just to, I know this is all just conjecture, like we're all just guessing at this, right? Like there's been no definitives as much as KD gets on and kind of states his case about certain things. It's more about clapping back around what's not true rather than what might be true. It's not his it's his prerogative. He need not explain everything in his life to, fans and stands that want to know about it. So I'm not taking him to task there, but it's just to speak that it's all we're all just guessing. With the Kyrie thing, do you think that it's more about, okay, we agreed that Kyrie didn't get the contract extension that he wanted, right? Okay, so there was clearly disagreements about it. Do you think Durant's asking out around that would be more about him seeing the writing on the wall that's like, hey, after next year, Kyrie's gone. And it's like, I'm just going to get a year out ahead of this now. No hard feelings between me and Kyrie. He understands these guys are all in this business together. This is just what happens. Do you think it's more about that? Because Kyrie is still on the team. So it's like, you still have this year. You could ask out next year. If you want to be traded, ask out next year, because that's where the Kyrie piece to me, I wonder, like, do you think there's something to that? It's like, hey, I'd rather get out a year early than a year late on this, because he's definitely not coming back. And why should maybe I'll just go land somewhere with a better chance to win for this year rather than play out the string.
Yeah, I mean, Katie's 34. Steph just got his 4th ring. LeBron's got 4 rings. Like, I get that he says that he doesn't like to compare himself to things and he just likes to hoop, but like, I just don't buy that at all. I never have. So, there's a part of me that kind of feels like, yeah, like there's probably a little bit of truth to that. I think also just like seeing that the team that he's on doesn't just automatically have that buy-in, that they're going to be like, hey, yeah, we're just going to give this guy this 4-year deal with no, whatever stipulations around games. Like, I feel like that also played into things where Durant feels like that's a violation of whatever, of commitment to him. And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. That's something I'm like, I don't know for a fact, but that was kind of, I guess, how it was suggested a little bit early on. So, yeah, it's just, the whole thing is like, we're all kind of taking shots in the dark here because there's no like explicit reason. And it's weird. There's been no reporting on that at all. Like there hasn't been and maybe that's something that'll happen after, after a trade happens or something like that. We'll get all this, he didn't, whatever. It was like the Harden piece I guess that was before the trade, but the Harden piece that Jake Fisher did about like, he didn't like the taxes and the weather. Like maybe that's all the stuff we're going to get later. But right now it's like, it's very bizarre that we don't really have a good sense of that. And no reporter is really given what's going on. Although it seems like the Nets know. So it's just bizarre, honestly.
Yeah, the hit pieces tend to come within 48 hours. They give it 48 hours, and then everyone's got it queued up as a draft, and then it will just like we're just waiting to hit submit with a nice headline. I think there will almost undoubtedly, no matter how this plays out, you'll see. I agree with you. You'll see plenty of that stuff happen
on ESPN.
And ESPN's been. I mean, ESPN's just holding it all, I guess, because they haven't given us anything. There's been nothing from then, so maybe they still seem to be in draft mode on nearly everything with this story. But from going on weeks with Kyrie, do you think that? Okay, well, let me ask you about a Kyrie question then, because if a lot of this stems from just sort of organizational decisions and around how Kevin Durant thinks about a situation. Do you think that was the correct move by the Nets to not go longer out with Kyrie? If we're assuming that, they clearly had talks. It seems like from whatever even baseline reporting around the Kyrie situation, there was a disagreement around terms. He possibly had some terms about that went the opposite direction, about maintaining a certain workload and things like that. I'm sure, as is always the case, money is the primary factor. So I don't think anyone needs to kid themselves too much with some of this stuff. Money is 1A, 1B, 1C, and then everything else is after. But do you think that knowing what we know about Durant now, if that was a problem, like if Kyrie not signing was a problem, was that an organizational failing to stick to their guns with Kyrie wherever they thought the value was, or not? Like, where do you stand on that as like Kyrie as a long-term investment? Because I think this is another thing. If we feel like it's all wrapped into the same envelope here, or present, or gift, or crappy gift, but if it's wrapped into something, should they have just acquiesced and said, hey, if it means this other thing, we did this once, maybe, we did this once a few years ago on the clean sweep day. We did it with DeAndre too. Like, should we not have stopped with that sort of buy-in, even if it didn't seem like maybe the best decision at the time?
Yeah, I think anytime you lose Durant, it's probably not worth, like, if that's truly the reason that Durant's out, he's like, yeah, screw this, because they didn't offer Kyrie that contract. Like, I don't care it hasn't been great behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, like, if you're trying to build a winning team, and you should be, if you own a franchise, your best chance is going to be with Kyrie and KD. I'm sorry. Like, if you get Jaylen Brown back and I don't even know, Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, and you're putting them next to Ben Simmons, and you have like some draft capital, like, that team's not going anywhere. Like, it's just not, versus like you have Durant and Kyrie, and like, you just need 1 year where things sort of go smoothly, and maybe that's never going to happen, and they don't feel like it will be able to, but that's the talent is there. Like, the talent is there. So that for me is like, if that's the reason that we are where we are with Durant, yeah, I do kind of find that that's an organizational failure. And I am personally in the camp of like, I think the organization has handled a lot of this really, really poorly, like just not done a good job with it. And knowing that, that's kind of why I feel like I can't just sit here and say, well, it's all Durant and whatever. And I don't feel like I'm in a place where I can't not assume that Durant wanting to leave is because of how badly this Kyrie thing was handled.
Yeah, we've been screaming this sort of like for weeks now, is that like, I get that people have sort of polarizing feelings around Kyrie. It makes sense. He makes it difficult to, among a certain group of people, makes it difficult to root for him. Among another certain group of people, it makes him incredibly easy to root for. But like, there's rarely an in between on him. Like, it's either you're kind of all in, or so far out to the point of like just never wanted to see it again. And and so I kind of get that, but I'm totally with you on, if your prime goal is to win, then you have to just kind of be able to deal with some of that other stuff, because everyone is a bit mercurial on from personality standpoint, especially when you get to a certain level, I think, right? Like, you should be, you're the top talent. Like, you have the ability to act a little different than everybody else when your talent's like, I'm fully, 100% talent based when it comes to that. And I'm with you. If that was at all part of it, it definitely does feel like a mistake. Do you think Kevin Durant in all this has hurt himself or helped himself if his goal is to be not on the Nets anymore? Like, if his only goal is to not be with this team, like, that's it. Like, whatever all the things we guessed at before, we're not guessing about whether he wants to be on the team. It seems very clear he doesn't want to. And at that point, the reasoning is moot. It doesn't really matter. It could be he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and like, whatever, it doesn't matter. He just doesn't want to be on the team. Do you think over these last, how long has it been? Like a month or so? Do you think he's hurt his chances of that, or helped his chances of that with how it sort of seems like it's been handled between the timing of the request? Let's call it an ultimatum to Sai. Let's say there's only these teams, like the things we kind of know about what he's asked for. If his goal was to not be on the Brooklyn Nets next year, has he done himself any favors there, or is this like the right way to play this?
Probably the right way, right? Like, I don't know what other way he's going to go about this. Like, I want to hold that answer off until we get to training camp.
Okay.
Because like, if he doesn't show up for training camp, then it's like, all right, this is getting real. And that's where I think like, that's where he's making the ultimate play. Like, right now, this is just like the classic trade request. There's just things being leaked, and it's all just kind of talk. And that, to me, like, whenever we have these situations, this doesn't really matter until we get to training camp and until we get to the games. Because no matter what, like, I think guys are going to just do what what Durant is doing right now. Maybe not as far as calling for the GM and the coach, or for the jobs of the GM and the coach. That was a new one for sure. But ultimately, like, this doesn't move me until we really get to when it counts. And for Durant to be 34 and willing to miss training camp after, let's be real, like missing a full year and a half of basketball, and somebody that values training as much as he has to get back to the point to where he has been in the last year or so. Because let's be real, it took a lot of training. It took a lot of focus for him to come back from this Achilles injury, for him to then say, hey, the preparation that I've needed my whole career, I'm going to skip that. That's when you're like, all right, this is getting real. If that makes sense. I don't know if that argument made sense there, but.
No, I understand. It's like, it's saying that like, we'll know, like, sometimes actions are the things that's like, you can say as much as you want. I tell my kids this all the time. Like, it's like, hey, you can tell me whatever you want. Like, I'm only going to look at the actions. You can scream that you're not doing this or insist that you're not doing something. But if your actions tell you that you are, then that really tells 99% of the story. And that's it. And so I think, from an actionable timeline, you're definitely are right, where it's like, this is when we'll know how serious he is. Right now, it is mostly probably just posturing with a slightly different taste to it, right? Because he's a bit more, he's out there on Twitter more than almost any other athlete is. He's willing to push back or snipe back at fans. Like if he doesn't, or writers or whatever, if he doesn't feel like something was said correctly, he does do that piece of it differently. But right, in terms of just not being on the team, that probably does feel like the very clear line of demarcation of where he's either going to stick to it or not. Like, do you think also so let's just talk real quick packages. I don't want to go through all the trade packages because that's been talked to death. Yep. Do you think a realistic package right now even exists for Durant? Okay, let me rephrase this. Whenever you trade Kevin Durant, you're losing. With Kevin Durant with 4 years left on the contract, you've lost the deal. So I'm already putting the Nets in having lost the trade deal here. So now we need to walk it back, whatever percentage it's already predetermined that you've lost. Like, do you think the rest of the NBA, even add in teams that haven't necessarily gotten into the mix, do you think they're looking at this situation with the same sort of appetite for where Anthony Davis might have been? Or, I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe there isn't an appetite for it, but do you think the market even exists to even get close? Or has this situation maybe soured other teams on just even the possibility of wanting to do it, even knowing what his talent is? Do you think there will be, when we actually get down to it, anything close to 75% of a reasonable market for Durant when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to get the Anthony Davis package. We'll start there.
No.
If we're going to bring that up. That just doesn't. I mean, part of the problem is that they have this rookie extension rule that seems to block half the trades that I think would make some sense. I mean, a realistic package is pretty simple to me. It's that Jaylen Brown, Derek White, maybe Grant Williams, couple firsts, 2-3 firsts. And I don't know. And I think I put this on Twitter yesterday. I don't remember. I said something along the lines of there isn't necessarily a guarantee that just by waiting, things are going to improve. I understand that Jaylen Brown and Derek White and Grant Williams is not exactly an enticing package, but if you look up and down the standings and you say, all right, which team is going to say, ooh, we're feeling pretty close? Would it maybe be the Pelicans? You're going to get a Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, couple firsts. I mean, they have a bunch of firsts at their disposal. Maybe. I mean, you're also then banking on Zion to be healthy and for this team to shoot out the gates. And I feel like we do this every year. We look at a young team and we say, oh yeah, this is their year. And it's just that doesn't always happen that way. There's been teams in the past that we've done this. The Kings, I think we did that a couple years ago. Timberwolves with Zach LaVine and Karl Towns and Andrew Wiggins. I remember that year people were thinking they were going to be a top end seed. I don't even think they finished above 500. So it's you have these teams that hypothetically are going to give up stuff at the deadline for Durant. And I just don't know who that is. What's the team right now that is is it Memphis? And if it's Memphis, is a Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson package better than Jaylen Brown? If we're going to play the hypothetical game, let's really play it and let's find something that's more enticing than Jaylen Brown. Cause I can't do it right now personally.
Yeah. I'm totally with you. I actually don't think the market will improve. I just think it will just change a little bit. but it will change. Like, it'll change laterally. Like it won't change because it's like going up.
Well, I'm worried you lose Boston. I think there's a real chance, like if Boston starts out well and they're, and I mean, they might even be off the table by training camp. Like they might just look at this and say, man, like we made the finals last year. Do we really want to have to flip our roster halfway through the year and kind of just go for this? Or should we just say, hey, this team's really good. We're really deep. We actually added Malcolm Brogdon to this team. I'm not sure why we would run that risk of flipping an entire team with 30 games to go and weirdly running into what the Nets did this year, where it's like you have this team that hasn't played together. Ben Simmons, who I guess never really got out there. It's just like, I think there's a lot of risk. If you lose Boston, like that's your main suitor. Like that's the thing that you're going to put on a platter and say, hey, here's like what you're working against right now to other teams. If you don't have that, then it's like, I do think the market can get worse.
Yeah, and like I totally agree. The only thing I was going to say to that was because we just agree that things in the NBA change without being able to predict it all. I do wonder if like you said, some of these teams will drop out, but then someone else starts off well, and then they all of a sudden enter the fray where we weren't even considering it. It's like, oh, maybe I'm not even gonna speculate it on it. Like Anthony Davis is like for Durant or something. I don't know, like whatever. Like there's worlds where something changes. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that like teams that aren't being considered as part of this like sort of landscape right now do enter it. And I agree with you. Just going back to the piece about training camp, like I think if it's a long way away from people that talk about the Nets every single day. I did do the little mental math on like when that date is. I'm like, wow, it's a lot of Durant talk from here till then.
Yeah.
Let's move off Durant here for a second. One guy that I'm endlessly curious about, and another kind of polarizing guy, everything with the Nets is polarizing. Another guy, so this does make sense that he's on the team here, is Ben Simmons. So I've wondered out loud on the podcast, so this is not new, about what Simmons sort of like where he factors into this Durant trade, whether he does or not, right? He never played on the team. He was hurt. We know it. It was been well documented. He had back surgery. They just settled an arbitration for the fines with the Sixers. So they came to some kind of whatever amicable agreement on him sitting out for last year. That's not going to bring that case into light, which I think probably everyone's really happy about. But Simmons is on the team. He's supposed to be on the team sort of exactly on the same contract timeline as Durant minus one season. So this is a guy that Durant is right now teammates with. We hear almost nothing about Simmons in this, except I take it back. What we hear about Simmons is how great it's going to be, and believe me, no one is wanting Ben Simmons to be great more than me. I say that with full honesty because if Simmons is good, the Nets are better, and then it's more fun to talk about the Nets. So like, there's no reason to root against any guys on the Nets ever when you do this kind of stuff because it's always better to be a better team. Okay, that being said, do you find it curious that that timeline is nearly 1-to-1 with Durant? They never played together. We hear nothing about these guys at all.
Yeah.
And then Durant wants out of the team. Again, I'm not saying this has nothing to do with group chats or anything else like that. Like it's not that. We've been talking about well in advance of that. Do you think like that's at least curious timing? And do you find it curious that I feel like almost hear nothing about Simmons except for the standard. He's in the gym. He's working out every day. It's going to be great. Defensive player of the year upside, transition, all the superlatives.
Yeah.
Do you find that curious at all?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't feel like they're on the same team.
Yeah. Okay.
Like we can be real. Like it doesn't. It's like for as great as this guy looks, like it doesn't seem to move Durant. Like I'll be real. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if there's a relationship there. I can't imagine that all of the stuff about him potentially playing in game 4 and then not ending up doing it. Can't imagine that sat super well with, and whether that was just the Nets mishandling things or if it was a Simmons, his agency problem. Really hard to tell, per usual, the Nets. Either way, can't imagine that sat super well with somebody like Durant, who's already clearly upset with things on this, about this franchise. So yeah, I mean, really, we can just be blunt. Like if he was looking that good and it was like, oh boy, we got Ben Simmons, like this might be the best he's ever looked. I just have to wonder, like, would that not sway Durant a little bit? And I'm not saying Ben Simmons isn't going to look good. I am really excited to watch him. I just want him to stay healthy. The back thing is a little concerning, but I just feel like if that was this big factor, I don't know. Like maybe I'm wrong for that, but
Oh, I mean, look, the reason we stumble over this one a little bit is because it is a guess, but
yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to get clapped back on this because every time I bring up Simmons on the podcast, someone or many people come back and just kind of explain to me why that's not the case or that Simmons is great. I get it. I'm not, this has nothing to do with that. This is just like a very clear, you're on the same contract timeline as this other guy. This never gets mentioned. There was sort of like a rough ending to the season with it last year. And it's crazy to not talk about it, honestly. Like it's crazy. I in some degree, I'm confused about how little it's talked about. You putting it like they're not on the same team is a correct take on that.
Yeah.
Because that is the feeling. They never get mentioned in the same sentence. They get mentioned apart from each other as like really good players with like upside and all this other stuff. But in terms of being teammates or like looking to the future, and maybe some of that's just the trade request. But it's funny because I think you can bring it up because Durant and Kyrie never get talked about like this, right? Like we spend differing reasons around why the Kyrie thing is different than the Simmons thing, right? Like there's clear, history and they did play together and all this other stuff. I just find that the Simmons thing sort of like endlessly curious. I think that one is another one that will get answered come training camp because right now there doesn't seem to be like any really, really clear answer on it. Shifting a little bit back to something you said before about Marks. So, okay, Durant makes the ultimatum, what seems like an ultimatum. I'm of the camp that it's like sort of like a half sort of fake ultimatum because it doesn't feel like he really wanted that to happen, like these guys to get fired. I think he just wants out if I was guessing. And that just, real quick. Do you agree with that piece? Like, do you think that he really wants these guys fired or that sounded like a nice talking point as I know you're not going to do this. So it makes my position a little easier to lean into that because I'm not at risk of this actually happening. I'll ask my second question in a second, but like that one first, do you feel like that was like a real ultimatum? Like me or them, let's go. Or it was like, hey, it's me or them. I know you're not going to do it. So just trade me already. Like I think there's two different versions of that ultimatum.
Kind of feel like it's both, honestly. I don't get the sense. Well, I'll put it like this. I would not say the Durant Marks relationship is very strong.
Okay.
At all. I think that is one of the key points right now, maybe more than anything, is that that's just not a relationship that's in a good place. So I think that's kind of why you see Durant going through Psy for the most part, just with his request in the first place, them meeting again. It's all with him and Psy. It's not necessarily him and Marks. Like that relationship is not in a good place. So, I kind of postured like, all right, if Durant truly wants Marks fired, I'm going to assume that there's somebody else. Like, let's say the Nets actually did that. I'm going to assume there's somebody that's willing to take that job that's close with Durant. I don't think I think ultimately, yeah, it's probably more likely he just said something that he knew the Nets weren't going to do. But I do think there's a world where he also had his guys in place if that thing did happen. Like that's a very tactical thing to go for two guys. I don't know. So I'd say it's probably a combination of both. But I do think there was probably a sense of Durant and his camp knew that was not going to happen in a way.
I'm so glad you answered it this way because it sets me up perfectly for this next question. So if there was even some truth to it, it doesn't matter what percentage, even some, can you make a case? What's the case to keep Sean Marks as the GM? At this point, we mentioned that there's been some a sort of high profile mistakes. Every GM is just going to make mistakes. It's you can't have a perfect track record. I think Marks had a very long run of actually close to perfect marks. No pun intended. These last few years, I agree with you without maybe going through all of them. I've labeled them as high profile missteps along the way over these last probably, let's call it 18 months or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
if you think there was even any seriousness to the Durant thing, can you make a strong, I'm actually not going to make you, can you make a strong case to keep Marks? Like, what is the case to keep Marks at that point? Like, do we have a strong enough case, or should it be like a closer decision than I think some people want to maybe allow into the conversation? Like, what is the case to keep him then?
I think from like a moves and acquisition standpoint, he's done really well. Like,
Agreed.
you know, and I get it. Last year's free agency wasn't great. The tricky part I have with some of this stuff is like, we know that the stars on this team had at least some say, maybe a lot more say than what's out there on which guys are getting signed. I know my Mike Scotto reported that James Johnson was a KD guy. So that's like a good example of, just Blake Griffin, LaMarcus, like those are guys that Durant brought in who looked good for 1 year. And then last year kind of was like sort of fell off a cliff a little bit. Both guys are unsigned now. So, I don't think that, I'll be real. Like, I don't think Marks had a great offseason last year. They built a team that just didn't make sense. I said it all throughout the season. It felt like they built a team that could hypothetically take down the Bucks when they really should have just kept the roster the exact same and done the same philosophy and just sort of been like, hey, if we were just healthy, like, we think we can beat these guys. But I think for the most part, he's done a pretty good job, even just looking at like their draft picks last year, like Cam Thomas, Kessler Edwards, Day'Ron Sharp. Like, you can talk David Duke Jr., you can talk yourself into all four of those guys. Even how we got here, we can track back to the Jared Allen draft pick and Karis LeVert. The D'Angelo Russell trade, I think, was a win for the simple fact that you were able to put together this winning season and you were just better than the Knicks that year. And that's why you got Durant and Kyrie. So I think he's done a good job in terms of moves, acquisitions. Bruce Brown for Musa is another good one. But ultimately, I will say this about Marks. I don't think he was entirely prepared for the responsibility of handling a super team and the things that go into that and the communication that goes into that and the PR that goes into that and the level of, I guess the level of what you need to build with the media to handle that. I just sort of, I feel like there's been a little bit of a sense of arrogance this offseason from the Nets front office. I understand they want to take the culture back. That's fine. You're allowed to want to feel like you want to get a grip of this team again, especially given the fact that they've really underachieved last year. But the way it's been done, the little things like firing Adam Harrington, it's just like, I just don't totally know if those moves were super well thought out. And it feels like it's just two sides being petty and trying to take little pot shots at each other. And that's the part where I'm like, I just don't feel like from a management perspective, the Nets have been super prepared for what it takes to handle and keep a super team happy. So I'm mixed on it. Ultimately, I do think you should keep Sean because, Durant's done. Like, it's very clear that he's not going to play anymore for Brooklyn. It's just a matter of when that happens. And your best chance going forward is trying to build something on the fly with someone like Sean Marks, who's really damn good at his job. And that's kind of just where we're at.
Yeah, and if you're headed toward like a mini reset, I agree with you. Marks, and Marks's grades on all that stuff is like it's an A+. It's really just is. Like his moves, I would say his moves right up until, and I'll even give the Harden trade an A+ because I think you do it every time. So I think that but it's where the concern I have, and this is not me calling for Marks's job. I'm just trying to introduce the other side of this coin, which is to say, so if there really was a choice between these two people, I know all the time, especially in, just different factions of the media, the GMs, it's always the benefit of the doubt on the GM, almost always, because most people work for organizations. They understand organizations. They, don't like the people calling for bosses to be fired and stuff like that. Like, I get why that comes out that way. And I agree with you, actually, if you're going through a mini reset like that, Marks is the guy. It is funny though, because if we agree that like around this other part, there was some big time ball dropping, then the Harrington, the one is like a true throw your hands up and ask what is going on here moment, because like there's not enough. It doesn't have enough to do with the team to have it really matter, but it has enough to do with Durant to really matter. So it's
right.
like,
And it's like, even if there's stuff going on behind the scenes with Harrington, or if it's just like, oh, we want to do, but it's like, it's an assistant coach at the
I
end
was
of
gonna
the
say,
day.
it'd
Like,
be
it's just
pretty
like,
damn
all
bad,
right, man. Like,
right?
what is he doing? Like,
right.
I don't know. I don't like it. Just for me, it's like that just felt like something that I do. Like, every team, every super team has certain guys on coaching staffs that are there because they're whatever,
Of
because
course.
it's a relationship with a player on the team. Like, that's really not that uncommon at all.
Of course. And my other concern with Marks too is that if we agree that this other part has been a problem, if at any point you thought, if you're Cy, if there's any question about whether he was going to be here for whatever the the length of the Durant contract is, at least, like, you should at least think about it. because like, if they shipped out Durant and then fired Marks a year later, then that would be the ultimate head scratcher, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's really going to happen, because I do think, in terms of, extracting value on his own terms, you went through the list. Like, the list is so good. He bought low and sold high on just about everything they ever did, right? Like, it took like an unbelievable degree. It's like, the list is pretty much amazing. Short of like Alan Crabb stuff, it's very hard to find, prior to last year, mistakes he made. Okay, next guy on that list then. Make a case for Steve Nash to still be the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. I know this is kind of putting you on the spot here, and so I get it, but yeah, make the case. Like, what's the case for Steve right now? 2 years. What is the case for Steve Nash to still be the head coach of the Nets, going into next season?
Maybe that we haven't seen him coach a team that doesn't have KD and Kyrie, so we don't know what it looks like in a way.
Right.
I mean, and that's not a strong case, by the way.
I'm only laughing because it's like the only way to make that possible is to do the thing. I get it. Like, this is a tough question. I don't have a clear. This is why I'm happy to ask and maybe like less happy to answer. But so yeah, I get that this is tough, but at some point, like, the question kind of has to be asked, especially if it's looking like ultimatum time. So I don't know. Is the only case? It might be the only cases we don't know. I mean, and he's Steve Nash, and it's not just like Doug Norrie, who has no track record, right? It's like,
right. Well, I mean, I think he was supposed to be a personalities manager, right? Like, that was the whole thing. And like, oh my God, if the personality's not been managed, like,
right.
What on earth is going on? It's like the Harden thing and this now. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, the only thing that you can say is that if this team is truly, run by, if we're going to phrase it that way, run by KD and Kyrie, even down to like how they play, then maybe Nash has got a bunch in his bag that he just hasn't shown. But you're not going to see that with Kyrie and KD on the team. But that's like not even a strong case. Like, I think there are ways, like, if you're a head coach, like, you should be able to figure out how to implement your philosophy and keep your superstars happy and let them play the way they want to play too. Like, there's a way to do it. And ultimately, like, I think Steve Jones says this a lot. Like, the biggest thing for the head coach is like, it's like 5% basketball, 95% of it, or maybe those aren't the percentages, but he basically says like a lot of it is just like the babysitting aspect of it, in a way where it's like, you're just trying to manage personalities. And I mean, it's been a disaster. Let's be real. Like, everybody's unhappy all the time. The freaking Cam Thomas is unhappy at Summer League. Like, what are we doing here? No way. So no, I'm surprised. I was shocked. We made it even to the end of April and Nash was around. For him to still be here now, I was like, I did not see that coming. I'll put it that way.
So you thought there was a chance that, like, last season there was a case to be made to even let him, not a case to be made. You're saying you were surprised that he made it all the way through last season, basically.
No, I mean, like, just after the first round, because the first round ended in April. Maybe it ended in May.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting the dates confused.
Yeah. Whenever it ended. I was just shocked that didn't happen, like, directly after. I was under the impression that things were not going as planned as early as game 2. And I kind of was like, all right, well, they're not winning this series after, like, it was, I think it was before game 2. I was like, all right, they're probably not winning this series. This is going to be an early off season. And my assumption was they're probably going to have a new voice in the locker room, and that didn't happen. And I was just like, well, I don't know what the reasoning is for that, and I still don't know. But hey, maybe he can coach. Maybe like that's really the only argument I have. Maybe if he's coaching Ben Simmons surrounded by, and by the way, they actually did a pretty good job building out this roster for Ben Simmons. Like TJ Warren's a good corner 3-point shooter, Royce O'Neal. Like maybe that's what they're gonna do is they're gonna be able to run things a little more smoothly. But I mean,
it's all good. Like this is a reason it's an on-the-spot question. There's a reason
I'm making a weak case for a guy that's like pretty clearly like a bottom 10 head coach in the league right now.
Okay,
like,
that's my other question, because you look, you're an expert on X's and O stuff. You're an expert on scheme and just like kind of diving into video and seeing what teams are doing and like kind of like, noticing patterns and what teams have been able to extract really high end, maybe let's say extract more from their players than other teams. Like I think, as Steve Jones is great, and I'm not a head coach, so we agree that scheme is at least part of it, right? Like it's what percentage it is, maybe it is only 5%, but like between that and your assistant coaches, I mean, you still still has to be a plan. Are you like, in your mind, have you seen, even understanding the Durant and Kyrie are just gonna, explore the studio space on their own at times. And so and that's just going to be what it is. In your mind, like, have you just seen enough that would lend an idea that there is a lot of just any coaching happening, or if it's just, or is it mostly that, like, just from a schematic point of view, like, have you not seen enough, or is that still to be determined?
Hard to tell because the roster was so weird last year. Okay. Like they didn't really have any primary ball handlers. And that's what happens when you get rid of James Harden, by the way, which, I mean, there's nothing they could do about that. But like that was such a clear hole in terms of they just didn't have anybody that could practice the offense. Like there's just nobody that could set things up. That's why you have the playoffs roll around and Durant's like dribbling into mid-post touches and getting stripped every 5 seconds. It was just very obvious like they didn't have that. From a spacing perspective, I mean, I threw up I think the Nets threw up a highlight of Patty Mills the other day, and the only thing I could focus on was that James Johnson and DeAndre Bembry and Claxton were sharing the floor. And I was like, like, what are you supposed to do with this as a head coach at a certain point? Like it was. So I don't think Nash is.
He made the three. Let's be results oriented. Patty drained the three.
He drained the three, but I'm like, from a results perspective, I basically what I'm trying to say is like I'm not gonna go ahead and give Nash a mulligan. I don't know if he's really earned that, or just say like, hey, like, man, that was a bad situation for you this last year. Because I don't think my problem with Nash really is I just don't know like what makes Nash a head coach, right? Like what's his thing? What's his defining characteristic? We've never gotten a feel for that. And I just don't know what that is. And that kind of freaks me out a little bit with head coaches. If I don't know, like, what's the thing, what's their thing, what makes them different, what makes them special, what makes them a leader of a team. At the same time, there were a lot of things that were not in his favor in terms of roster construction, really throughout the entire year. That team was just they never had the right pieces to really put things together to run the type of offense that they were trying to run.
This makes it, and this whole thing, like this laundry list of things that also went wrong with it, also makes this an impossible evaluation, right? Like, hey, if you have Joe Harris, maybe the whole thing's different. Maybe if they just re-sign Jeff Green because that seemed like the perfect fit, and make that a priority. Things like that. You said primary ball handler. I've been using the word connector for that. Like just someone to connect pieces together, like on the court, like just be able to not even read and react to every single thing, but just find connections around getting guys into the right spots. They just clearly didn't have that. I mean, maybe Simmons is that guy for this coming year. It's not going to matter because we're not going to know. But like, he seems like that to some degree, but not. But I agree with you. But this is evaluating everything with the Nets over the last, really 2 years. But I'll call it basically since Durant's foot was on the line. Like since Durant airballed the three against the Bucks in Game 7, right? Like from that moment on, it's become a totally impossible evaluation standpoint for nearly on like the entire vertical of the organization, because everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. Yeah. And there was also some mistakes along the way. So if you combine those two things together, offering up an evaluation on that, it seems possible. Real quick, let me just give you quick thoughts on, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, because we talked like about how everything possibly that's gone wrong has gone wrong, and like that's totally true. But I will say from like the Nets perspective, I feel like they leaned into that a lot, and Nash was a mouthpiece of that in terms of saying like, yeah, like we're a new team, oh, like everything's got like it just to me like culturally. I mean, this team's so big on culture. That's just like a losing mindset. Like it is. Like you look at the Miami Heat. Miami had like basically nobody playing for them, and they were the number one seed for a couple weeks. I don't think they were. I don't know if they had no Jimmy and Bam. I don't remember what the situation was, but they basically had nobody. And Spoelstra
I don't think
was
their starting
able to,
five played. I don't think they're like their core five played more than like
sure.
27 minutes or so. It was some crazy number
Right.
heading into the playoffs.
And they were the one seed. Like, and they
Yeah.
and they showed up in the playoffs and they had an identity. And really the reason they didn't win and they were a Jimmy Butler 3-pointer away from making the finals were reasons that I think people saw at the beginning of the year in terms of half court creation and stuff like that. Whereas the Nets, like you look at them and you say, okay, like, yeah, like defense might not be great, but they just leaned into this mindset of we're this new team. Oh man, like bad things keep happening. I guess we just like, oh man, there's just so much going wrong. And it's like, I kind of feel like Nash is ultimately like, he's the guy in the locker room, whether that's something that he feels or if that even goes from the top up and Nash is hearing this and it's like this brain trust of people being kind of just negative about things. He ultimately, he's the person that's going and talking to media and giving those quotes, and the players are seeing those quotes. And it's like, the fans are seeing those quotes. And it's, I think that's another thing for me that I didn't love. I just don't think the mindset was correct last year for as bad as it was and for as much time as Kyrie missed and just everything that went wrong from Durant's injury. There was no resilience, none from this team. This team quit after game 2. Like we can be real, like they quit. And you know, and that to me just suggested that there was no resilience really at any level of the organization. And Nash is, you know, the guy that's responsible for keeping that, you know, I guess that optimism high in the locker room.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you said that because I think even to some degree, I was just giving them, I was doing the talking point there, which was like, oh, it all went wrong. Like what, you know, we play this 100 times. It's never going to go wrong this many times. Right. Like, but you're totally right because every team has something go wrong with them.
Right.
And sometimes lots. The Heat are a great example. Like, you know, the Bucks lost Middleton. I know, you know, at a key point in the series, I know people talk about that. They have a little more cachet with this because they already won a championship. Like even like the Suns and stuff who just had a total collapse. Like there was at least like there seemed to be not this kind of malaise over the team that you're probably correct in saying at some point, yes, it's gone bad. At some point, can we overcome what's gone bad to exceed expectations? Because I think you're right. Like at no point was there like, oh man. I mean, there's like a few moments, like the Cam Thomas game, like when against the Knicks. Like there's a few moments where they kind of just pulled something out. But you're right. For the most part, it was a total excuse train the entire time.
Yeah.
And no one from the organization said, hey, no excuses. We should just be X, Y, and Z. And now I'm never going to be able to unhear that because I think that you're totally correct. And
I mean, they had Kyrie and KD for the playoffs. Like that's all, like that's all you needed in a way. And it was like, oh, okay, well, they're going to get swept. They got swept. They won a damn game. I get that. We can go through all the point differential. All right, they got swept. Like, fine. The point differential was close. That just means you lost a bunch of close games that you could have won. If that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's the whole point with resilience. Like,
and it's crazy too, because I'll always give the excuses, but I feel like I do kind of take these guys to task at times about like certain decisions they made. But and even I'm like, well, the buzzer beater, and then like if Claxton doesn't miss the free throws, it's just like this whole there. And I almost start doing that same exact thing, which is you're right. It's a total loser mentality around this. And if it's going to be even a percentage of what your identity is at that point, it is going to be, it's too much. Like 1% of that is too much. And not to mention whatever the percentage was, which is way higher than that, which was, hey, if we don't have Simmons, we can't get on the same page whether he's coming back. Then maybe that's not their fault, right? Like they don't know. I don't know what the communication was. Real quick, you mentioned game 2 a couple of times. And I'm just remiss because I actually had this in my notes. I heard you say this the other day. What do you think was specific? Like, was there something specific about that game too that you thought like that was the end of the line? Because that was kind of like, this is probably just my bad. I heard you mention it, and I forget where it was not on here. It was, I don't even think it was on Twitter. Maybe it was another spot you did. Mm-hmm. You mentioned game 2 as being, in your mind, what you thought was like sort of the end. You mentioned it a couple times here.
Yep.
Was there anything more specific? It was just the way the game went? Because kudos to you. Like, that's a very specific time frame. Yeah. like more, and actually in some ways more specific than I've heard other people mention around like a very clear line in the sand of where things might have just where the train might have just jumped off the track, to combine a few different metaphors.
I think I'll just say that I think there was a sense internally that it's like, this isn't our year.
Okay.
That's what I heard like directly after that game. And I was surprised because you're going home at that point. Teams have started out down 2-0 before. Like, I mean, for Christ's sake, like the Bucks came back.
I was gonna say the Bucks did it last year.
Finals, like
the Bucks did it last year against the Nets.
I mean, so it's like, and it's not the first time that's happened. So it's like I was just a little surprised to hear that. Whether that's legitimate, whether that's applies to every single person with the organization, I don't know. This could just be a small group. It could be, but I just, the fact that was out there at that time was just kind of curious to me, that was floating around. So, I mean, I think that's probably the best way to put that. That was something that there was just a sense of like, we don't know how we feel about our odds in this series, which, I mean, let's be real. A lot of people picked the Nets. I did. I thought they were going to win that series. And, especially when they lost Rob Williams, I was kind of like, all right, like this could be it. And no, it clearly, I mean, whether that idea that the season was done was applied to the entire organization or just a small group within it, it certainly held true because they didn't win another game after that. They did not win another game. So,
well, and by the way, even if you had said, if that had even been, if you had a sense of it and others had a sense of that, like as someone who like would put money on this, that would have been time to unload everything on even crazy implied odds that this is like not going to happen and the sweep is going to happen. John Corrales on Locked On, we openly mocked Homer John Corrales for saying the Celtics were going to win in 5. Jokes on him, off by a game. But so that's just where it's just, I don't know. Hey, buddy, if you hear those things from now on, just like shoot that my way. Just in terms of, I won't say anything. We'll head on over to Bet Online and just make it work from that standpoint.
I mean, like you look at everything that's happened in this offseason with like both sides. Let's be real, being super petty with each other and not trying to meet in the middle. It's like I'm not super shocked that the team had already internally said, "Well, we're not winning this series" as early as game 2, based on how just volatile and vicious some of this stuff has been in the offseason. It all adds up.
And it makes like this stuff actually way less surprising. And I, it like just, and not like it was ever like a huge surprise. I mean, it was a surprise I'm surprised we're this far down the hole at this point. But if you take the whole thing in totality, it's not all less surprising. All right, let's get out of here on this. I really appreciate you spending this much time with us. Predictions on what you just think happens here. Like, I know we kind of like, kind of have sort of joked about this, whatever. If you had to think like, what is the ultimate, let's say, man, it's crazy. You can't even give these hypotheticals because you got to give freaking 4 other little asterisks next to it because it's like, well, if it's training camp, well, if it's the trade them. What do you think happens here? I'll put it this way. What do you think happens here from between now and training camp? And that could be it could be nothing. It could be a trade. Like, what do you think from now to the day training camp opens? Do you think we see any movement at all? I'll start there.
I think this saga never ends, and I spend the rest of my career covering this stupid. No, I don't. It's like the Kyrie vaccination thing again, where I'm just like, I just want to stop having to cover this. I don't want to do this anymore. Oh boy.
Okay, no, you know what? Stop. I'll ask you a different question. I'll give you an answer.
I think it ends training camp. I think the Boston thing is the obvious trade package. We will just be curious to see if Boston wants to do it by then. They might not.
This is the last one. What's the best case scenario for this situation? Like I'll frame it that way. What if you could just go best case, knowing everything we know now or don't know, what could be the best outcome to happen here? And I'm open to the idea that there isn't one, but like in a world where, the infinite monkey theory, where if you just, if you play out all the things, eventually this one thing will happen. Is there a best case version of this that it has any realistic option of happening?
Durant stays. And I think that's what the organization is really, really hoping for, because they know, like, hey, deep down, like, that's our best chance to win. That's a very risky game to play for the reasons that I mentioned, for the reasons that if Boston goes on a hot start or even just makes it in training camp and says, yeah, we're not going to gut our team now at this point. Like, let's get our guys together. Let's work on, how we're going to play this year and get everybody on the same page and build team culture and try to build this sense of like it's like the classic, like, I don't know what, the 2014 Spurs, I think that's what I'm thinking of, or they lose the year before and it's like, all right, let's come together. We're going to win this together. Hurrah type thing. Like, I think, yeah, I mean, if you truly do feel like there's a small chance that Durant returns, and if you can just play hardball and he's just gonna be like, well, I don't know what else I'm gonna do, then I think that's probably your best case scenario if you're the Nets, for the reason that we've mentioned, for the reason that we said that, like, the Nets with Kyrie and KD are the best possible Nets team you can put out. But boy, if that doesn't happen and you kind of kick this down the line and nothing comes up for you, there isn't that trade for you, you've played a very risky game, and you could lose even more than you already have by letting Durant make a trade request in the first place.
Man, these never end on the good note. And that's just been
the biggest pessimist, so it makes sense.
Dude, how can you not be? How can you not
cover the Nets?
I usually tend to, it's funny about, I'll close on this. I usually tend to, we have a theory around our house that it's like, no one can ever be as mad or as sad as the other person, because it doesn't pay for everyone to be down in the dumps about it. Like when you're driving in traffic, you can only have one person can be freaking out about the traffic, but it doesn't pay for both of you to freak out. Like one person can go one direction, one go the other. This is one of those situations that really challenges that, because even when you get to the end, it's like, yeah, I just don't see it. I don't know. It doesn't feel positive. All right. That is Matt Brooks, Nets Daily Basketball News. Check him out. All those places. Follow at Matt Brooks on Twitter. Matt, really appreciate your time for jumping on with us. Hopefully by the end of the summer, we are on to the Jaylen Brown or the Brandon Ingram or the Kevin Durant era in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I would love a resolution, please.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Yep.